Adult tonsillectomies are much more complex than you think. This video will share with you my story, the story of some of my friends that have had them as well, and why you should rethink having one. The reality is adult tonsillectomies are much more complex than children. Your surgeon may have recommended it, and it might be time for you to have a tonsillectomy or get your adenoids removed. I would highly discourage you from getting it done. I would highly encourage you not to get it done unless it is seriously an emergency. My story is quite complicated on how we got to the point where I decided to have a tonsillectomy at the age of 20. It was much more complicated than I was originally told. Typically, if someone as a child has tonsil issues, they will get removed within the first 5 or 10 years of their life. It is a fairly simple procedure. It's not a fun one. I personally obviously haven't had it done, but I do know children who have had it done at a fairly young age, and honestly, within a year or two, they probably don't think about it anymore. Now, as an adult, things get much more complex. The surgeon will tell you it's a pretty straightforward procedure, and from their perspective, it truly is. The reality is they're just larger. My personal story starts when I was 16, where my immune system decided to start failing me. Fast forward almost 15 years and I have a very complicated medical history. In hindsight, my tonsil issues were probably part of a much larger systematic issue that I was having with my body. As much as in hindsight, I wish that things may have been different, it was getting to the point where every time I had a sniffle or a cold, I honestly could not sleep because I would stop breathing in the middle of the night, wake up coughing, almost like sleep apnea, but the difference was that my throat was literally closed due to the size of my tonsils. If this is your situation, I totally understand if you want to move forward with the tonsillectomy, but I would recommend that you do a few things before you do. 1, talk to your GP. If you've been through multiple rounds of antibiotics and things of that nature, you may want to take the next step to talk to a rheumatologist. Rheumatology is the people that talk about some weird things, and honestly, they can do some testing, potentially even genetic testing, to find out whether or not there might be an underlying issue that isn't your tonsils, but is associated to either autoimmune disorders or immune suppressant issues that you may be having that you're unaware of. People who have tonsil issues in the later part of their life, either in young adulthood or in their late teens, will often have systematic problems with their tonsils. Now, the reality is I wouldn't wish a tonsillectomy on my worst enemy, and I honestly truly mean that. It is a challenging procedure and you are almost guaranteed complications. Though your surgeon may not tell you this and they may tell you you are potentially at risk for complication, the 4 people who I know have had adult tonsillectomies have all had serious complications. I mean, chronic bleeding, complications having to redo the surgery or having to go back post-op due to additional complications, post-op, massive infections, which is what I had, and very long recoveries. These recoveries can be grueling on the family and friends that are around you. And not only that, but it is an awful recovery. If you even don't have any long-term issues and or don't have a long situation like mine where I had an infection post-op, the chances are your recovery will still be a very lengthy one. I personally had my adenoids and my tonsils removed at the age of 20. I honestly don't regret the decision because I was able to breathe afterwards. I would have potentially second-guessed it had I had the knowledge that I have now. Having taken those extra steps to talk to my GP more lengthy about this procedure and making sure that I follow up with additional specialists and not just a surgeon who does this procedure, I think would have helped me understand what was actually going on with my body. I have multiple autoimmune disorders, and had I known this at the time, I think things may have been a little bit different. At my age, I was in, my early 20s. things from a medical perspective were different. And not only that, but I wasn't at high risk for a lot of things. So I can understand the surgeon's willingness to let's just cut them out. Considering the high risk of me having emergent situations if I were to get a really bad cold or flu, and then would end up stopping to breathe and Luke having to literally smack me so I would breathe again at night, which obviously is a pretty scary thing. Looking back, was this just regular sleep apnea, which I was diagnosed with 12 years later, or was it my tonsils and my sleep apnea together creating this problem? We'll never know. What I'm trying to say is just think twice before you agree to have an adult tonsillectomy. It is a serious procedure. I'm not telling you what to do with your health. You know you best, but gosh darn it, it is a awful procedure to recover from. I ended up being bedridden for over 3 weeks post-op due to obviously the infection that I had and the additional complication of every time you move and you have to lift your head or hold your literal head up, your throat moves. Try and move your head without moving your throat. You can pause me, try and do it. You'll realize really quickly at how structurally necessary your throat and your neck is. And the entire subset of your tonsil and adenoid removal will literally create so much scar tissue that every time you move, you will be in serious pain. Eating and drinking is a nightmare. It took me 2.5 weeks before I could eat anything other than a smoothie or a popsicle. Trying to make sure that you stay hydrated is almost impossible. I ended up having to go back to Emerge to be able to get an IV drip done just so I didn't become dehydrated. These are all things that happened within my post-op period that were incredibly challenging on friends and family. And if you are planning on having this procedure and think that in 2 days from now you're going to be back at work, I promise you that is not going to be the case. This is not an easy procedure, and I hope that if you do have this procedure, that you are in a safe place with a lot of support because you're going to need it. I will never forget the amount of days and nights that I spent crying from pain during this procedure, and everyone and anyone that ever tells me that they're thinking about getting a tonsillectomy and they're over the age of like 10 to 14, I tell them my story and the story of the people around me. Some of them have decided not to get their tonsillectomy and have decided to look at other options. Others have decided to have their procedure done. They may not regret it, but it is definitely a painful one. It's definitely one that they agree with me post-op that it is just a very hard one. It is not the most challenging or worst procedure I've ever had in my life. Now I get to say that because I've been through a lot. But the reality is most people who have an adult tonsillectomy will tell me that it's by far the worst medical thing they've ever been through. I hope this helps somebody out there just have some more information. I know not a lot of people talk about adult tonsillectomies, and I hope this gives you a little bit more perspective and thought if you're thinking about getting one yourself. If you have absolutely any questions at all, obviously I've had it done myself. If you have any specific questions you'd like to ask me, by all means, leave them in the comments. I would love to help you out any way I can and, maybe enlighten you in one way or another. I hope to see you guys next week, and don't forget to slow your roll. If you are planning on having a tonsillectomy, I have a range of liquids that I use during my colonoscopy that would probably help you post-op tonsillectomy. Check it out over here.